Hello, and thanks for joining me for episode 10 of Beating BDD, a podcast about body dysmorphic disorder from the BDD Foundation in the UK. First, a quick apology for the long gap between episodes. Various things have got in the way, most recently the COVID-19 outbreak. I hope you're all keeping safe and well in these crazy times. For this episode, the first of two, I spoke to Oliver Butcher, who's currently in the middle of treatment for his BDD. You'll find the second half of his interview in episode 11. Until then, over to Oliver. We've had some incredibly difficult times for your BDD, haven't you, over the years. Why have you wanted to come and talk about it today?
I mean, I think for me, this is a very, very big deal in terms of shedding the remaining shame that I have for this condition, and really just to tell people and let people know that it's not a condition to be ashamed of. You know, it's a very, very normal condition that people deal with. It's very, very widespread. But it's one of those conditions that's very kept under wraps and people keep it to themselves. So, yeah, I'm really just trying to shed the remaining shame that people will feel for this illness. So, yeah.
It's a really good motivation, yeah. Mm-hmm. And you've been in treatment for your BDD for about a year now. Where would you say you are with your recovery?
Well, I am nowhere near obviously recovered, I would say. And that's what's interesting about listening to the other podcasts that people have done and hearing sort of where they're at. For me, I'm sort of about a year down the line with the CBT therapy and exposure therapy. But I would say I've only really started to embrace it in the last 4 to 5 months, really, in terms of actually doing what is required of you for the exposures. Because I think for me, that's been the most difficult part of all the treatment that I've been going through. Actually having to challenge those things that you haven't been able to do for many years. At the start, it is more difficult, but it does definitely get easier as you go through the exposures. Mm-hmm. I would say that I'm coasting through that middle stage of the treatment. Obviously, the BDD recovery is never ever a straight line. It's a squiggly sort of line that you go through. So I'm not expecting that I'm going to be recovered next month or next week. It's a daily battle, this illness. So yeah, I mean, but I would say I'm definitely on the track to getting to where I want to be. Now, is it something that I will get rid of forever? I don't know. Having so many thoughts for so many years, I find it difficult to think about not thinking about those things. And this is something that I'll discuss a bit later, which is reclaiming your life with BDD is sort of where I'm at right now. Is sort of, how do you gain back that time that you have, quote unquote, wasted, doing the behaviours, being in the mirror, etc. You kind of forget what you miss doing with your life. You forget what you enjoy. You forget what makes you happy because you're so consumed by the shame and the doubts that you have about yourself. So, yeah, but I think for me, I have come a long way. I have made more progress in this last 5 months than I have in the previous 10, or in the previous 10 years, actually. So yeah. But I think I'm on the road to getting there.
Yeah. And it's important, I think, isn't it, to recognise how far you've come with it?
Yes. Yeah, it really is. I mean, if you consider that even a year ago, there's absolutely no way that I would have been able to come down to London. There's absolutely no way that I would have even been able to wear these headphones that we're wearing right now. If I'm being brutally honest, it was too difficult to go to the gym. It was almost impossible just to go to work. And luckily, that's what has really saved me through all of this time is still being employed and having an employer that really understands me and this condition. Previous employers could never, ever put up with the backlash that comes from having a condition like BDD, and my sort of specific issue with it is timekeeping. Obviously, lots of people will feel that feeling of being the late guy. That's what I've been sort of known as my entire adult life. Yeah. So but I think it's very easy to fall into a trap of it, and with BDD it becomes normal to you. So for me, sort of waking up 4 hours before I had to go to work was normal, spending copious amounts of time in the shower, brushing my hair, those kind of things, they felt like normality, and not doing them felt like the strange thing.
The exception.
Yeah. It felt weird to not do those things. And it's amazing where I'm at now, and thinking the things that I can do now, and thinking that there is a future there for me to do those things. If I want to go swimming now, I can go swimming. If I want to, go, I couldn't go try on clothes. I couldn't go and do anything like that because all of those things were too difficult for me to do. Yeah.
So it's opened up whole new areas of life living again.
And I think this is where it comes, as I said earlier, about reclaiming your life, finding out what you enjoy. And obviously we change our passions change as we get older, and our interests change as you get older. And definitely my interest changed as I went through this BDD journey, because it made me become very insular, very, isolated. And there was a lot of time that I've spent on my own. So, doing sort of independent research to myself, and wanting to better my own knowledge is sort of what I've liked to do over the last few years. But when you come from where I've come from to here, it's really easy to forget. And if I think back to, say, even 2 years ago or a year ago, there's absolutely no way that I would have been able to even come to London, even on the train or anything. There was just go to work, come home, and that is good enough, But obviously that's not how I want to live my life anymore.
Could you go back? Would you mind going back to when your BDD first came on and just telling us what that experience was like? How did that happen?
So a lot of people who have BDD, they do sort of come at it from the angle of saying, well, I do remember a specific event, or I do remember a specific comment. For me, it was when I was about 8 or 9 years old. My family, we had just been on holiday to Florida, as you do, the whole Disney experience, all that stuff. And this is sort of before the whole social media explosion has come. So as a kid, you're not really seeing yourself a lot. And what I remember is seeing a video of myself on a very small camcorder. So I have this very, very vivid memory of seeing one of those little flip open camcorders, with a little screen on it. Probably one of the first edition ones, and I remember seeing a certain angle of myself, a certain profile angle. And this is sort of what became a bit of an obsession for me, was a profile angle. So I remember looking at that recording, and a question sort of popping into my mind, which was, is that really what I look like? And I don't know where that question came from. I don't know why I asked that question. But I did. And it kind of sparked a bit of a curiosity about, well, that's not what I thought I looked like. And I think from then on, I have always struggled with photography and photos of myself. And, as we were talking before about how photos are a flipped image of yourself, they're a static image. You don't actually see the muscle movements of the body, the contours of the face. You don't see that happening in a picture. But obviously when you become sort of obsessed about that, and you start to ingrain that in your mind, that image in your mind, it becomes really hard to imagine that as being animated. You see it in your head as a fixed picture. And that's definitely what I saw for a long time, is sort of this fixed image of myself, rather than this, the whole of me, rather than
living, breathing person.
Exactly. Yeah. You start to see yourself as pictures or images rather than the whole package. And preceding that, after I saw that recording, I think what happened is sort of as I sort of became into my early teenage years. So I didn't really start any of the behaviours at that point. There was no sort of there was not really anything I was trying to fix, quote unquote.
Okay.
But I definitely had a curiosity there about what what I saw in my head was not what I thought, or not what I saw on the video, right? And I remember getting a smartphone, and this is kind of where probably the behaviours started around BDD, and being so young, didn't realise that obviously that they were behaviours like that. So getting a smartphone at about 13-ish, I can't remember specifically when it was, but obviously it was camera phone. And this is sort of at the time when social media is exploding, Facebook, MySpace, all that stuff, Pixo, if anybody remembers that. So there was a big obsession about, for me, about getting the best picture. And I remember probably in my early teenage years, 13, 14, spending copious amounts of time, hours, trying to get the perfect picture of myself. And I think that ingrained in my mind this sort of, you have to be perfect. And I think that's really where it all stemmed from, is those behaviours then coming with the explosion of social media. I think it raised up the importance of it for me in my head. I thought it was the way you look in real life, doesn't matter too much if no one's seeing you, but as long as your profile is okay, on your profile picture. And I think that this is a big problem with young kids now that are also getting into social media. It's becoming even more of a thing now. So yeah.
I remember reading a stat, and I can't remember exactly what the percentage increase was, but it was increase in levels of anxiety among young people since the advent of smartphones.
Yeah, I don't doubt that.
It was really high.
Yeah.
I
really don't doubt that.
General anxiety, not BD, but
I mean, whether it be BDD or general anxiety, I think that people they use their phones as a crux now. I mean, we all tend to grab our phones in those awkward situations or that. So it is becoming even more ingrained and at an even younger age now. And it is very dangerous if you let it spiral out of control. And obviously I kept all of this to myself, taking hundreds of photos of myself at angles, angles that no one is ever going to stand there and stare at me at, but being very, very obsessed about, this angle here and this angle here, and really just scrutinizing myself about it. Like I couldn't accept that was my face. It was really, now I look back on it now and I see the evolution of the behaviors. I see very clearly how it went from that to that to that, and I'll get onto the behaviors that came later, which is really where the real problem started, for my behaviors in terms of the amount of time that I was spending on them. So,
Sure.
So yeah.
Very interesting. You described the onset of BDD as being like taken hostage, and I can already see from what you've described why you say that.
Yeah.
But can you explain that in a bit more detail?
Yeah, it's a term that we sort of used in my family to describe it, and a feeling of being, overtaken, overcome by something. The term that I always like to use was sort of like a monkey on your back kind of phrase, if you've ever heard that phrase. I've got, get that monkey off your back. It's kind of like almost like having a rug on you or a weight on you. And a lot of people have said this, that BDD can manifest itself in a physical feeling. And that's exactly what I still feel on a daily basis now. Granted that level has come down massively. The physical symptoms that you get from it, like almost like my body like tingling, with anxiety, basically, is really, I don't think many people realise that there is a physical side to it as well. And actually, for me, I think the physical side comes more later on with the behaviours, because my specific behaviours, really affected me physically, just in terms of standing for so long, like being in front of the mirror for so long.
Yeah, okay.
There's been times where I couldn't even hold my arms up because I'm so tired. Basically, I can't hold my arms up anymore. So yeah, but I think that term of monkey on the back is kind of like just a weight on you, something which is always sort of niggling you and is always there and is never going away. That's kind of the best way I can really describe it. It's always niggling you, really.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it kind of, there were some days where I was able to, it didn't enclose me fully. And there were some days where it fully enclosed me, in the early behaviours. When it came to later on and I got really down into the behaviours and into the routine of doing them, that's when it became self-destructive, and just was sort of cry for help, really, at that point. So,
yeah.
But yeah, my mum and brother like to use the term hostage, because in a way, I was talking with this about my mum the other day, and she was worried that this illness had taken me over, she had lost me as a person. And it's only really in the last 4 to 5 months that I have started to really regain that person that has always been there, but, has just had this thing blocking them the whole time, really.
Yeah,
so.
You're describing it really well. I'm sure people are going to relate to what you're saying. So what happened then? How did the progression occur so that you're going from being relatively innocently affected at sort of 9 years old through to these quite extreme behaviours?
Well, I think people do sometimes talk about traumatic events that happen in their life. So after the smartphone came and after the social media explosion, life ticked on. I got on with school life. And just to touch on that really is that my schooling life from a BDD standpoint is quite different. I wasn't bullied at school. I'm not saying this I don't want to say this in a very big of myself kind of way, but I was sort of in that popular crowd. I had a very sporty older brother who knew loads of people. So I had lots of friends initially as soon as I joined school. So during that sort of early school life, it didn't really affect me too much in my day-to-day life. It was only really when probably my mum and dad separated when I was about 11, 12. And there was a lot of angst around at that time about, general divorce proceedings and all that stuff. And then shortly after that, my grandfather died. So there was a series of events that happened within sequence with each other that really put me back emotionally, I think. I was sort of able to push that to one side though for the sort of the remaining years of my schooling life. And then around about 16, 17, I started getting into skateboarding. I started, changing my appearance. I used to have very long hair, used to cover a lot of my face for obvious reasons of trying to cover, to disguise yourself. And I ended up going on holiday with my best friend at the time. He had a property out in America. His family was quite well off, so he invited me out there for a 3-week vacation. And unfortunately, at the end of the holiday, I ended up having a bit of an accident, and I ended up breaking my leg while I was over there. And it's sort of if you picture the scenario, you're 10,000 miles away from home, no phone, no contact. You break your leg in a skate park. You have nowhere to go. I had to ask some random person to give me a lift to the hospital because I had no idea where the hospital was. So it was all a big mess. And I think what happened is when I came back from that holiday, it was a very, very crucial moment in my life. It was a very, very important time. It was when I just left school and everybody was kind of at that stage where we're deciding, we're going to university. Are we going to college? Are we going to work, or what do we do? What's your next step in your life? And for me, what ended up happening was I came back from holiday, and I had to spend two months sitting in a bed, And during that time, I changed a lot. I become very, very cynical, very narcissistic, very attacking myself. Like, this is, if only I hadn't broken my leg, I could have been doing this, I could have been doing that. All my friends are out there doing X, Y, and Z. And I was sitting in bed, dreading every moment of it and dreading the whole recovery procedure. And I think what happened was I never got out of that funk. What proceeded after that was about 2.5 to 3 years of just straight up avoidance tactics. So I pretty much, after my leg healed and everyone had gone away and done what they wanted to do, I was sort of left, well, what do I do now? Do I get a job, or what do I do? But then I wasn't feeling confident about getting a job because of how I was feeling after the leg break. And so what ended up happening was I kind of just went very inward. And if I'm being honest, a lot of that time is a blur at the moment to me because it was just day by day. I was pretty much living a nocturnal life, spending most of the night scrutinizing myself, looking in the mirror for hours in the dead of night. I'm talking 3, 4 in the morning. Everyone else is asleep. Everyone's getting up for work at 7 in the morning. There'd be times when my mum would come down and I'd be making dinner at 4 in the morning. My whole life was rotated in a complete opposite direction. And that time is what really sunk the behaviours and the real detest for myself during that time. You know, I really, at the end of that period of time, I really didn't want to live anymore. And I know that might be really hard for some people to understand, but, you know, I would wake up and I would just pull the covers back over and just go back to bed. Mm-hmm. You know, I would wake up at, say, 6 p.m. and just, well, the day's gone now. Who cares? Doesn't matter. And unfortunately, that did go on for a good few years, before, probably 2.5, 3 years before really I got my big break into the working world, which really gave me the confidence now that I have now. You know, so but and that's why I'd probably say I want to really touch on that as well, about work and how I found it. It's been my saviour, really. You know, my family and work has been the two things that have really kept me from doing something very, very silly. Because to give yourself a focus is the most important thing. I mean, I think for me, not having a focus during that period of time is why I just went off the boil. So after that period of time is when sort of what I would really call the proper behaviour started. So and my sort of my two things about my body that I've always really hated have always been my nose and my hair. They're the two things that I've always been scrutinising myself about. And it was sort of an amalgamation of the hair and the nose combined, all to do with angles was what my thing was all about. You know, I didn't want people looking at me at certain angles, you know. People that I'd be talking to in a shop, I would always stand at a certain angle. You know, I'd never let anyone take a photo of me at the left side. It would always have to be at the right side. And I would make sure that would happen. You know, there would, like, if anyone was to check my social media, there is absolutely no photos of me. You pretty much won't see a recent photo of me because of that angle thing. But then I think what happened is I did change quite drastically with my style. So I tried to go down a different route, a bit more trendy route. I cut my hair, and I think in the cutting hair process, it really shifted. My focus really shifted from this sort of covering to kind of masking. I mean, I've got very thin hair, and I was always very, very obsessed about, you know, my hair's thinning. I don't want to go bald. What will I look like if I go bald? You know, and I'm a catastrophizer, so I would think about what the worst thing. People are going to look at me and laugh and say your head looks like this, and you know, it was a constant battle with that. But I did change my style of my hair, and I think that secured in me this feeling of it's got to be perfect. And the analogy that I like to use, and the image I like to use, is like a clock dial. Imagine like a clock. And for me, in order for me to leave home, I had to hit 12 o'clock. You know, everything had to be perfect. Otherwise, I wasn't going anywhere. And what I have noticed through this experience and through the CBT therapy and through the exposure is that sort of boundary that I have to make myself perfect has opened up. You know, I can see myself as more acceptable now in different environments, whereas before it had to be the same way every time. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm talking about doing things like putting so much hairspray on my hair that I would sleep in bed, sitting up, so that I would not touch my hair, so that the next day I could wake up and just go to work and didn't have to worry about it.
You can't have slept very well.
I didn't sleep.
No.
I to be honest, my sleep is still one of the big sides of my life that I am trying to get better. And it is getting better because there's something that I want to say that one of the previous people said, which is about a sense of peace. For a long time, I could not relax at home. You know, I'd go home and actually home for me was actually the worst place to be because it was almost like a prison. I'd go there and I'd come home from work and I'd go straight to the mirror and I'd be there for, you know, 4-5 hours in the evening, every evening. And I think the biggest change for me in a day-to-day life is actually just a more of a peace about just everything, you know, but being more at peace with who I am as a person. And okay, I did these things, I've wasted this time, but it's made me into the person that I am now. But then I think following on from what I said earlier about the gap that I had with the depression, and sort of where the behaviours then came with the change in the style, is when my real behaviour started. So doing things like fixing, hair pulling, combing my hair for hours. I just used to spend a lot of time in the shower, literally individually pulling my hair in different parts because I thought it would, I don't really know what I thought it would do. And this is a big thing about BDD is we do behaviours that when you actually ask yourself what you're trying to achieve, the answer that you're going to get is you're not achieving anything by doing that.
You don't know.
You don't know. I mean, that's the hardest part, is that everything that you're doing is trying to fix a problem that actually does not exist. And it's this issue of reality versus, what somebody else sees. Is that what I see? And, what is reality is something that I've had to really come to terms with, is that when people are telling me that what I see is out of, is blowing it out of proportion. That is the reality. The BDD mind is what me and my therapist talk about, of this sort of intrusive mind that you have, this little voice that tells you to do these things. That is the thing that's lying to you, not yourself. So, one piece of advice I'll try to have for people, I know it's really hard, is try not to listen to that little voice in your head that says that you're not good enough or that you need to. So for me, it was a lot of the time, it was like, if I didn't do the behaviors in terms of like the pulling or the fixing, I would feel like I'd feel like I need to do it. It was almost like, and this is, I think other people have echoed this, which is OCD and BDD are very, very closely linked. They're almost like brother and sister of each other in terms of the condition. And, I think for me, I definitely developed OCD tendencies around the behaviours. So there was lots of hair pulling, lots of hair fixing, copious amounts of product. So way too much hair wax, way too much this, way too much that. And I thought what was quite interesting, and we discussed this the other day with my therapist, is that how my obsession around sort of my nose changed to my hair more like, so nowadays I'd say that my nose is normal. I don't and that's actually really, really hard to say, really, really weird to say. But I would say, yeah, that side of it has kind of bled off. The real main aim was really around the hair and how that all sort of looked together. So I think that the behaviours really then started then properly, and it was sort of like a day-to-day, everyday thing, For I'd be getting up maybe 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning sometimes to be at work for 8 o'clock. My mum would wake up and I'd already been in the mirror for 2 hours, So most of the time she would say to me, "You've already done a full day's of work before you go to work."
Yeah.
So no wonder I was always tired all the time. So.
And what did you do while you were at work? Did you do lots of checking and?
Well, this is where this is where probably I think in recent years it's become it became really, really difficult. I'd say last year when I started all the therapy to challenge those behaviours, because what I realised was I was doing that a lot, during the day, skulking off to the toilet, and in my old jobs I had fixed toilets, where you had a lock on, so I could go in there for however long I wanted, really, so. And a lot of time it would require somebody to come and knock on the door to then say, "Are you in the toilet?" Is that, not saying is that where you've been for all this time, but, just wondering where you are, But I think moving into where I work now, which is at John Lewis, moving into John Lewis was a bit different because the change rooms are all open. There's a lot more members of staff that work there. Partners. Mm-hmm. There's a lot more partners that work there. So the ability to sort of lock yourself away is not there, really. Mm. Now, I found a little bit of a way around it when I started at John Lewis. I started sneaking into the disabled toilets. So I would go to the other side of the shop and come away from my department without telling anybody, and go into the toilet, come back 20 minutes later. People are like, "Where you been?" But, you know, that's what I would do, because there would be some points during the day where I would get such an incredible urge, such an incredible compulsion, you know, to do these things. And that's what a lot of these behaviors are. They're compulsions that your brain tells you that you need to do. You don't actually need to do them, but your brain says you need to do them to feel okay and safe. So I used to skulk off, do those things. But then obviously what's happened is with JL, which is amazing, and I've got to say that on this topic, is that they have been incredibly supportive of me, and they're the only business really that I've ever been able to share my story with. You know, what they do for me on a daily basis is amazing, and they are the reason why I'm still in work now, and hopefully can have a good career with John Lewis, really.
So that was part 1 of Oliver's story. Thanks to him for taking the time to share it. To hear about how Oliver's BDD affected his family and his advice to other sufferers, listen to episode 11. You'll find it on the BDD Foundation website, as well as on major podcast apps and Spotify. Just search for Beating BDD. In the meantime, remember that this podcast isn't therapy, so please do seek help from a trained professional. Thanks for listening.